富贵，镇阳人民政府今天胜利了。
为建设富强、民主、文明、和谐、美丽的社会主义现代化强国努力奋斗。
On a winter's night in December 1978, 18 farmers in the village of Xiaogang in Fengyang County, Anhui Province, concluded a contract. It read, "We will distribute land to every household, and they will sign and apply their seal. Each household will work to fulfill their annual public grain quota, but will no longer seek state assistance. If this does not work, we officials may face prison or death. In that event, cooperative members, please raise our children until they reach the age of 18. They had no idea that their action heralded a reform that would change the fate of hundreds of millions of Chinese farmers. When the spring tide rises, it starts as a trickle before eventually becoming a surging torrent. In June 1977, a 10-minute video for internal use was screened at a meeting of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee. It showed the dire state of poverty in rural Anhui Province. The meeting decided that an able official should be dispatched to improve the situation. Wan Li was chosen and appointed first secretary of the Anhui Provincial CPC Committee. The following summer, Anhui was ravaged by drought. As an emergency measure, the Provincial Party Committee decided to allow farmers to borrow land to try and grow more wheat. Fengyang County was among the hardest hit areas. Its summer grain production was significantly down, and the yield was virtually nil in autumn. The district committee convened a meeting to discuss how to survive the famine. 23 party members unanimously agreed to lend land to the local farmers, with responsibility for what was produced from it contracted to individual households.
23号开始分，24号整整那就不一样了，啊，男女老少除了一个老出来个小，整个上体去的，都到自家体去，那样干，用过着过。
Xiaogang village in Anhui Province's Fengyang County was once known for its reliance on public grain, financial aid, and production materials purchased with loans. Things were very different after the 18 farmers launched their contracting initiative. From what they managed to grow, they were able to hand over their quota, save some for the collective, and keep anything that was left for themselves.
79年呢是分条雨水，那我们家讲的土话就是丢什么收什么。
Finally, they were reaping the sort of harvest they dreamed of. Xiaogang's grain output increased fourfold in the course of a year. Individual incomes increased 16 times, from 22 yuan per capita to 350 yuan. Across the country, various other forms of agricultural production responsibility system were being introduced. In Shandong, Sichuan, Inner Mongolia, Gansu, Henan, Guizhou, and other places, individual villages adopted new approaches to cooperative farming, from team-based and household-based contracting to output-based remuneration. At the heart of any rural reform is the land. In China, there was a mix of public and collective ownership. This gave rise to a contract responsibility system based on joint production, which featured a farmer's production responsibility component. It incentivized the farmers and stimulated the rural areas. It also boosted production and brought profound change to rural China. In acknowledging that the household contract responsibility system was invented by farmers, Deng Xiaoping said, "The household contract is very effective and the change is very fast. Most of the production teams in Anhui's Fengyang County are now engaged in household contracting and have seen a great increase in output. The Fengyang County mentioned in the song Fengyang Flower Drum has seen most of its production teams join household contracting. Their life and appearance have changed within a year." For 5 years, starting in 1982, the CPC Central Committee's #1 document focused on popularizing the household contract responsibility system. The contract system brought about major changes. In 1984, national grain output exceeded 400 million tons for the first time. The total output value of agriculture, forestry, animal husbandry, and fisheries increased 1.3 times compared to 1978. China's per capita food production was close to 400 kilos. In the 1980s, the song "In the Field of Hope" became popular across the country. It describes how, in spring, every family would be busy plowing the fields. The floodgates had been opened. The tide of rural reform was unstoppable. Hainan County in Zhejiang Province is hundreds of kilometers away from Xiaogang village. Hainan has a large population, but limited land. The local cooperative members found it a constant struggle just to survive. They attempted various projects and started many small businesses. One of them was an agricultural machinery factory founded by Liu Guanqiu.
那个人都是集体，个体有很少。这种工作，你要稍微搞了大一点的，不允许。这样子一搞搞了6年。 玩了7个地方，这里不行，哪里不行？真的东躲西藏。
Liu Guanqiu's agricultural machinery factory started out as a small workshop. It eventually became the first Chinese auto parts supplier to enter the US market. It led the way for later rural enterprises to acquire overseas listed companies. Liu Guanqiu is acclaimed as a pioneer in demonstrating to the world the entrepreneurial acumen and commitment to reform of ordinary Chinese businessmen. Today, his company has grown into the Wanxiang Group, a multinational enterprise with annual revenue of over 100 billion yuan and profits of over 10 billion. Starting in 1979, a succession of rural enterprises emerged from Kunshan, Jiangyin, Zhangjiagang, and Changshu in Jiangsu Province to Wenzhou in Zhejiang, Jinjiang in Fujian, and Foshan in Guangdong. In 1987, the output value of China's rural enterprises accounted for just over 50% of the total in the countryside. The fact that it surpassed agricultural output for the first time marked a historic change for China's rural economy. Agriculture is the foundation, and industry is the path to wealth. Rural enterprises were another great creation by China's farmers, following the household contract responsibility system. They blazed a path for promoting rural industrialization, urbanization, and modernization. With rural reform in full swing, attention turned to the country's cities. Urban reform began with the delegation of power, profit retention, and rejuvenation. The central government would delegate financial and property rights to local governments. Enterprises would be granted greater autonomy in production and operation, boosting their incentive to maximize production. In May 1979, 8 large state-owned enterprises began implementing pilot reforms. They included the Xiaogang steel plant. Then, in 1981, state-owned industrial enterprises began promoting greater autonomy. In October 1984, the third plenary session of the 12th CPC Central Committee adopted a key decision on restructuring the economic system. As a methodology for promoting comprehensive reform of the economic system, it says that the socialist economy is a planned commodity economy based on public ownership. As such, its social and economic development must be fully developed as a commodity economy, which is also a necessity for China's economic modernization. It also states that only through the comprehensive development of the commodity economy can the overall economy be stimulated. The focus of reform was beginning to shift from rural to urban areas. Economic system reform had begun in earnest. Enterprise autonomy would be further expanded. The system of planned management would be reformed, the volume of mandatory directives would be reduced, and the price system would be reformed to allow diversified types of pricing. With the adoption of these measures, the traditional economic system was being transformed and economic development boosted. The tide of reform was like a mighty river surging onward. It was as if society as a whole was competing in a great dragon boat race, with everyone striving to gain the lead. The private economy was becoming more active. In response, the central government proposed to encourage and support the proper development of individual enterprises. As a result, more people began traveling across the country on business, and greater numbers of vendors were seen on the streets. On Renmin West Road in Wenzhou stands a shop. Though very ordinary looking, it played a key role in the launch of an era in which the term individual entrepreneur would become familiar to the Chinese people.
好的，好的，这里有现货的，我自己给你整理好。
In the autumn of 1979, 18-year-old Zhang Huamei made a bold decision. She would go into business for herself. At the time, there were still many restrictions on private enterprise. To make ends meet, she would furtively sell buttons and other small daily necessities from a stall in front of her house. But little did she realize that opportunity awaited just around the corner. In December 1980, Zhang Huamei was issued with individual business license number 10101. 24 years later, she learned that she was the first person in China to receive such a license under the reform and opening up.
工商所过来的，他说你现在拿了这个执照以后，你们可以做大一点了啊，国家是允许你们做的啊，你们就大胆的去做吧，不有什么顾虑啊，反正你能够开多大你就开多大，没关系的。
As entrepreneurship developed, Nian Guangzhou became a controversial figure for a while. Nian was the owner of Shazi melon seeds in Wuhu, Anhui Province. His product was famous, and sales were so good he needed a bigger workforce. From a handful of staff, he expanded to an operation employing more than 100 people. But Nian faced criticism. Some people said the size of his workforce violated the regulations. Deng Xiaoping read the report on the case and said, "My opinion is that this matter should be put on hold for 2 years. If we act now, the masses will anticipate a change in policy and feel uneasy. Let Shazi melon seeds operate for a while. It won't hurt. Has it damaged socialism?" As policies were slowly eased, so the private economy began to develop. The small workshops, factories, and stores grew bigger, with some ultimately becoming national and even multinational businesses. The film clips are from the 1980s. They feature successful entrepreneurs who had, as youths, been unemployed. They include Zhang Huamei. They were among the earliest beneficiaries of the reform and opening up policy. In 1978, the number of family workshops and individual businesses in China was only 140,000. By 1981, the number had grown to 2.6 million. The development of the individual economy and the rise of the private economy helped promote the common development of multiple forms of ownership within China's socialist economic structure. The traditional planned system began to evolve into a market-based one. Farmers' markets, vegetable markets, community food stores, and agricultural byproduct stores were becoming a new trend. The circulation of goods and produce through various channels in various forms was energized. The economy was developing in the direction of making life more convenient, guaranteeing the quality of goods and promoting consumption. Simultaneously with the gradual deepening of economic reform, by the mid-80s, reform in the field of science and technology was also well underway. In March 1985, the CPC Central Committee convened a National Science and Technology Work Conference. The meeting adopted the Decision on the Reform of the Science and Technology System. Wang Xuan from Peking University saw his opportunity. He was developing a Chinese character laser photo typesetting system. In 1988, he entered into cooperation with Peking University's new technology company, predecessor of the Founder Group. The laser photo typesetting system was a huge commercial success. It triggered a technological revolution described as from lead and fire to laser and electronics. Wang Xuan was hailed as the modern-day Bi Shang, the 11th century inventor of movable type printing. While Wang Xuan led the way in business, scientists Wang Daheng, Wang Ganchang, Yang Jiache, and Chen Fangyun were exploring technological innovation. On March 3, 1986, they wrote to Deng Xiaoping. In their letter, they suggested that China should set about raising its profile in the international high-tech field. 2 days later, on March the 5th, Deng responded. "This proposal is very important," he wrote. "It warrants a decision without delay." Deng recognized that science and technology were a decisive force for economic and social development. He put forward the famous assertion that science and technology are the primary productive forces. He also said, "To reform the economic and science and technology systems, I am most concerned about talent, respecting knowledge and respecting talent. In November 1986, the CPC Central Committee and State Council approved the National High-Tech Research and Development Program. It would later become known as the 863 or March 86 program. It represented a major breakthrough in China's opening up. In March 1978, the central government appointed Xi Zhongxun as governor of Guangdong. In July, after arriving in the province, Xi set out on a tour of local cities and counties. In Chongying Street, he saw a line of stones serving as a dividing line. On one side was bustling Hong Kong, while the mainland side, by contrast, appeared depressed. The situation weighed heavy on his heart. In April 1979, Xi traveled to Beijing to attend a Central Work Conference. He made a speech in which he expressed the hope that the central government would grant Guangdong Province special policy support in view of its proximity to Hong Kong and Macau and its wealth of overseas talent. Specifically, he wanted to establish export processing zones in Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Shantou. His idea was strongly supported by Deng Xiaoping, who proposed establishing a special zone. He said the central government had no funds to spare. Its support would be in the form of policies. The province would be free to forge its own path. The CPC Central Committee and the State Council held repeated discussions and made extensive preparations before, on July the 20th, 1979, a rumbling sound was heard in the Shekou district of Shenzhen. Construction was beginning in earnest. Land was being reclaimed and docks built. Skyscrapers rose at the rate of a floor every 2.5 days. The Shenzhen Speed achieved legendary status. The slogan, "Time is money, efficiency is life," spread, inspiring people throughout the country. 4 special economic zones in Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen would be the portals on China's reform and opening up. They would set an example for the rest of the country to follow. In the spring of 1984, a train carrying Deng Xiaoping left Beijing, bound for the south. He said that it had been his initiative to create special economic zones. The central government had merely given its approval. As for whether they were a success or not, he wanted to see for himself. In the course of nearly a month, Deng toured the 3 special economic zones in Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Xiamen. He was deeply impressed by the vitality he witnessed. He wrote in an inscription, "The development and experience of Shenzhen proves that our policy of establishing special economic zones is correct." That same year, the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, acting on a suggestion by Deng Xiaoping, decided to open 14 coastal cities. They included Dalian on the Liaodong Peninsula in the north and Beihai in Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region in the south. These cities would be described as pearls, forming a necklace around China's 10,000-kilometer coastline. In 1988, the central government established Hainan Island as a province with a view to boosting its development. China's door to the outside world was opening. The ancient, yet now youthful country was holding its arms wide in welcome. Reform and opening up was revitalizing the country. From the planned economy to the support of the market, and then to the planned commodity economy, reform was advancing step by step. The mobilization of resources and the factors of production and the free flow of people created a spring tide that was generating the energy to raise confidence and hope across the country. In the course of all this progress, a key theoretical achievement was recorded that would be decisive to the country's future development.
我们的现代化建设必须从中国实际出发，把马克思主义的普遍真理同我国的具体实际结合起来，走自己的道路，建设有中国特色的社会主义。这就是我们总结长期历史经验得出的基本结论。
On October 1st, 1984, Tiananmen Square hosted a celebration of China's 35th National Day. It served as an occasion for reviewing the achievements of the reform and opening up. A group of students from Peking University raised a banner which read, "Hello, Xiaoping." This simple, cordial greeting expressed the Chinese people's appreciation for Deng Xiaoping. It also implied popular support for the great cause of reform and opening up that he was leading. The spring tide was rolling, powered by a mighty spring wind. It was the spring tide of reform, the spring tide of a new era. Surging proudly, it embodied the Chinese people's strong desire to realize socialist modernization. The onward rush to a brighter future was unstoppable.